He built through
No.
strategy. She builds through people. Same industry, completely different operating systems. The legacy wasn't actually the business in this case. It was helping her.
That's
And
awesome.
as a parent, if you really have the ability to help your kid that way, that's a legacy that most every professional or parent wants to pass down to their kids. They just need
100%.
frameworks figured out how to do it.
This is Successfully Retired with Hamilton Brandenburg.
So today I am joined with Joe Cianciolo. Recently I don't know if you're going to call him your better half or your other half. I'll let you and Dan work it out. But Dan Threlkill and I talked about housing stuff in Cherokee County. And Joe and I had reconnected and been speaking on LinkedIn. You help business leaders see their blind spots, right?
Well, thank you for the introduction. And yes, we all have blind spots. My name is Joe Cianciolo, and I am, as a lot of my clients will term, I am a business therapist, which is something that I didn't intend to do. I started my career a long, long time ago as a teacher. And I think there's some natural inclinations of seeing people for their potential. And when you're a teacher, that's kind of your job. And now I get to do it with adults and business owners and professionals as they try to figure out why maybe their life isn't lining up the way they thought, or it's all great on paper, but it just doesn't feel right or enough, or all the typical things. So when you said help people find their blind spots, everybody is wired to have blind spots. And it's my privilege to be able to study people, their choices, their patterns, and their tendencies, to be able to help them make sense of why they choose the way they do, what lights them up in a good way, what causes them stress, what their typical reactions to stress are. And then how do you, once you become aware of who you are, what you bring at your best, how do you accept that as being you, and then how do you act accordingly?
It's funny, a number of years ago, my mom's mom, went to merge, like on the highway or something. My mom was like, hey, you didn't check your blind spot. And she's like, I don't have blind spots, Pam. I've always liked that story. There's a part of that I think has been passed down to myself and all my siblings, and maybe human nature. We all think we don't have blind spots, but we all do have blind spots. And it's a role of hiring good coaches, consultants, and just bouncing, backboards to bounce the ball off of, to get feedback and to help ourselves become better. So one of the things that you and I talked about, we had coffee a week or two ago, and we talked about the topic of just legacy planning, because that affects business owners a lot, and preparing kids for an inheritance. I used to work in car business with auto dealers, and I saw a lot of cases in the territory that I worked in where you had second and third generation owners of dealerships, sometimes even more than that. But then you'd also have a situation where you had a guy who was a first generation dealer, or maybe a second generation dealer, and he was really successful at like building a lot of stores. And then there was just a little bit of a disconnect, and like, I don't know if my kids even want this, or how to make sure that they're ready for this. I just thought that would be an interesting topic for us to talk about, because a lot of times people think about legacy planning as doing a will, doing a trust.
Well, I find it interesting because, as you were saying, I have 100 ideas coming to my head. Because as a parent, like I know now, as a parent of the last however many years it's been, I have two 11-year-olds at the moment. We want so much to work really hard and to provide them the things that we think they're going to need. And when it comes to legacy, I mean, you can ask the simple questions of, will I be able to afford to live well? And then would I be able to pass it so that they could? But my work goes way beyond that. That's one component of it. But I want to know, will my kids be okay when life gets hard? Life is going to provide our children hardships that they have never seen before. And money can provide layers of cushion or support, if you will. But how do we help them navigate and make choices when they are thrown that stress? So in my work, we study stress and pressure. And so business owners, they don't just build wealth in a vacuum. They go through struggle and stress tolerance and specific ways of thinking. But those things typically either come naturally to them or they have practiced them for years. And so you may, not necessarily in a bubble, but create your own financial planning legacy that you can then pass down. But are we passing down or expecting our kids to have the same operating system or the same drive that we do?
And if you grew up if you grew up poor, and let's say your thing was, I'm going to get out of the hood, I'm going to climb. And I think about Batman. I don't know if this is a little cheesy, but was it Dark Knight Rises where he gets thrown in like this big pit prison and he was like climbs up, and that's has like his moment of like the heroes returning. So if you're the guy who built some really successful business because you grew up in a 400 square foot shack with an outhouse in the backyard, you intuitively have been given a blessing from the universe, even if it didn't feel like it at the time, is that you learned how to be really scrappy, and you learned how to be hungry and aggressive and all these skills. And so what did you do with them? You turned around and you created a really plush environment for your kids with tutors and private education and all these wonderful things so that they would have every opportunity you didn't have. And now they're going to be faced with challenges that for many of them, it'll be the first time they've experienced something really difficult. And you have to ask yourself, am I preparing them in the way that feels best, but am I preparing them in the best way so that they could step into my role if that's something that they wanted and be successful? Or am I robbing them in some way of the experience that's going to create what they need to slay their own dragons, right?
Well, one of the things that I've seen recently with some, I guess, high profile news stories of some very wealthy people saying that they are not going to pass down a financial cushion for their children because they want them to learn how to do it for themselves, which I think is a counterswing, which, I mean, it has its benefits and its drawbacks. But the way that in my work, what I love is I study each person, whether it's a business owner or a business professional, I study their own influences, what got them where they are, their own timeline. And we use these patterns overlapping all of that to understand what helped them get there, whether it was intended stress and intended challenge or sought challenge and sought stress. Yeah. And then we can create sort of this, we call it like, instead of using other people's playbooks, what your playbook was. Sure. And then because of the fact that I'm a parent, I naturally think of my kids every day in my work. And so I have the opportunity once I have a business owner or a professional with me get to that point where they can make sense objectively about what got them there, for good, for bad, and for ugly, then I flip it back on, now what are your kids building their same thing? And if you have to look at their perspective now, what do you think they'll say in 10 years? And what will they see that you have provided them? And it's a huge breakthrough, because then we as adults who are trying our best, like we're working really hard, we're building our business, we're building our legacy, but now we get a chance to not wait until it's passed down. We get to decide what kind of influence we want to have on our kids. And that way they can get brought into the process while it's happening, as opposed to waiting. And I think that's the biggest mistake a lot of people make, is that they work super hard and then it's time to stop. And then the kids are like, no, I don't really want this.
Yeah. And you're talking a lot about imparting the values and imparting the character and the direction at a young age. I would say too, there's even an element of it where financially there's so much of a default mindset and I work probably, our Venn diagrams might overcross a little bit on who we work with, but I probably work a little bit more with just traditional, I had a 401k and I'm retiring kind of people. But a lot of times there's some mentality of like, hey, I want to leave some money behind to my kids when I die. Cool. Great. Your kids are going to be in their 60s when they inherit it. They'll probably be financially independent themselves at that point in time, because you're going to pass away in your 80s or 90s as people continue to live longer. So while you're scrounging and you're, spending less money than you could, allowing your retirement accounts to build up just so that you can leave money to the kids when they don't need it, when they're in their 60s, when they should be financially independent themselves, then you've missed out on the opportunity to bless them along the way a lot of times. Because $50,000 to a 30-something-year-old who's got their own kids and they're working through their career, that goes a lot farther than $500,000 or $1 million when they're 67 and they've already got a few $1 million. They already have their own retirement plan. They're not counting on you for that.
Right.
Right. The whole mentality of saving legacy for once you're in the grave, at that point, it's too late. You have the chance to write your own legacy now, whether that's through how you are intentional with your dollars or how you're intentional with imparting your values to your kids. When you have this conversation and you flip that script and say, okay, now we know what your backstory has truly been, your playbook has been, let's talk about it for your kids. What are some of the reactions and the directions that conversation takes you?
It can get heavy, which is why a lot of people that I work with do refer to me as business therapist. I'm becoming much more comfortable with that terminology, because that is kind of where my mind goes. It's the realization that we as parents often sort of project a certain thing down to our kids, even like we said before, like an operating system that we want them to have, because we know that we made it work. If it worked for us, it can work for them.
Yes.
And so the first thing I have to do is really sit in the space, which sounds super cheesy, on the front porch of them realizing that their kids don't have to become them, but they also don't have to rebel. Our curiosity then becomes, who are our kids naturally wired to be? Any business professional can have the exact same conversation of, okay, what have my kids seen from everything that I have done? What about that matches with them? Because sometimes kids just want nothing more than to be just like their parent.
Yes.
But they're just not. I mean, I'm not wired like my dad as much as I am wired like my mom. Yeah. There are times in my life where I have tried to follow in their example. But now, because of my work, I realize I have components and I have pulled influence from them equally. And I pulled influence from teachers and coaches. And so as a parent, then I get a chance to look at my kids as a clean slate. Okay, I want them to have the opportunity to see the kids try them all on for themselves, and then decide. So, for example, if it's a business owner that I'm working with, they tend to be very future-oriented, very, very driven, builder-type people. They built their business or their product or whatever through aggressive work, risk-taking systems. Sometimes they did by copying others, but sometimes they created on their own. But they are workers, and they might have a kid who is not future-oriented. They might be more people-oriented, more driven by things like relationships and harmony. So the mistake that the parent makes in that situation is they think that their kid isn't ambitious enough or doesn't have what it takes. But that's not necessarily true, and that's where I get a chance to shed light for my client to say, hey, every single one of these wirings is strong in what it's designed for. It's our job to make sure that we understand the strengths that come with it and the blind spots that come with it, because then you can provide team strategy or strategic hiring to make sure that all the other things are in place. So when it comes to the same thing with leaving a nest egg or something behind, is what would your kid do with it? Like,
yes,
I have one kid who, they're still young, but they definitely are future oriented. I am very much what needs to be done right now. Strategy, logic is my drive. But I have one that is a caretaker, and he would do anything for the people around him. It's my job to not only provide frameworks for him to learn how to be a professional or to learn how to build his own wealth, as you said, but then to understand how to do it around his wiring in a way that makes sense for him, so that he's more driven to do it. So when we say my kid isn't ambitious enough, is it because they don't have our ambition?
Exactly. Oh, that's huge. Hey, did you ever watch the movie October Skies? It came out in like the late 90s. Jake Gyllenhaal, he played it's sort of like biographical film, but it's like him, and he's in a Virginia coal mining town, and he's super into science. And it's like, the dad in like the 1980s Ford Bronco denim jacket and a case of Budweiser, and if you quit now at the coal mines, you'll be a quitter for the rest of your life, kind of thing. And that's kind of like, it kind of cracks me up, because when you talk about this, I'm just thinking about that movie. I don't know why I haven't thought about that in a long time, but it's this mentality of like, hey, if my kid isn't driven to do all the things that I am, they must not be driven. And this mentality that parents a lot of times have, and I think too, you do see a lot of times, I don't have any studies to back this up, but you'll see where generations of families all do the same kind of work or stay in the same relative tax bracket a lot of times. And it's because like their whole social circle is people that are exactly like them. So a lot of times what's prohibiting your daughter from taking over the business, and say, for my example, wealth management, a traditionally male dominated industry, or preventing your son from becoming an orthodontist is, well, you don't know any orthodontists. So he's not ever going to think and envision in his mind, like, this could be a career path that would actually harmonize very well with my interests and my skills. Like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the elf who wants to be a dentist, right? So as a parent, learning how to detach from your own inner dialogue, your inner like hero's journey, and realize this is one hero's journey, but there's other ones happening that could be completely different stories that just happen in the same zip code inside the same house with my family. What does that look like? How do parents typically respond and work through this? And do you have any stories about how this has like change the direction that a family business has gone in their legacy conversation with their kids?
Yes. Well, I find it interesting. I love that you brought up that movie because we watch it with our kids, and that's kind of one of the things
Are you
that
talking Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or Jake Gyllenhaal?
yeah, that too. The Jake Gyllenhaal movie.
Okay.
Because I do, and I'm watching one in real time, not necessarily a client of mine, but somebody that I follow, and it's really interesting because there's a regenerative agricultural farm in South Georgia, and the guy.
So it's not me. I'm just kidding.
No, I think it's Will Harris. If you know White Oak Pastures, and he was on Joe Rogan, and he speaks with this very old established farm, country accent. But what I have noticed, and of course they don't talk about it this way, but I study patterns, so I've been watching it. This farm's been around for 5 generations or something like that. So it's generational wealth. Yeah. And they're doing things a little bit differently. But now his daughters have come back into the business, and all of a sudden their social media presence, the way that they're marketing themselves is completely different. The story is the same. The farm is the same. Even the impact that the farm wanted to have or wants to have, which runs that whole town, is the same. But he has finally allowed them to do it. I'm in the middle of working with a number of clients that are trying to pass down business to their children. And unfortunately, I have one specifically where the dad has, pulled up by his own bootstraps, figured things out. Every time there is a challenge is a figure it out kind of person. That wiring is not very common. As a result, the children that should be inheriting the company have no desire to inherit the company, except for the fact that, as you said, it's known and it's provided their lifestyle. It's comfortable. It's what they've grown up around. So the intent was, it's here for you, just run it. Sure. Well, neither of them are necessarily that intent on wanting to do it. So what my job is to say, okay, here are the components that you bring to whatever circumstance or situation that you're in.
Yes.
And you can still be an owner without having to be the same person that the original founder of the company is. But you have to be humble enough. Both the person who is passing it down and the ones that are inheriting it have to be humble enough to fully accept their wiring. And that's why I said they have to understand their circumstance, because the parent or the owner who is trying to pass it down. We don't just do this with family-owned business. We've done this with other business owners who want to pass it down to employees.
Yes.
And we do the exact same setup, which is, how do you understand what the strengths and weaknesses are the people who are committed to running your business so that it maintains? And then we take them through a strategic hiring situation where if we need to hire another executive level person, that it balances them out. But most of
That's
the time,
such an important level of foresight, though, because if you just think to yourself, well, I've raised my son, I've raised my daughter, I've given them good values and a good work ethic, and they know this business, and you just hand it over to them. But one of them is super relational focused, to your point, where it's like, hey, where I derive value is in harmony with my relationships. And it's hard for me even to articulate what that sounds like, because I'm very task oriented. I'm very much, let's raise the flag over the top of the hill. So if you're approaching it without understanding how they're wired, not only are you setting them up for potentially for failure, a worst case scenario, right? Maybe they won't fail, but best case scenario, they might be really unhappy in a role that you just could have hired out. And you could have said, okay, instead of you being like the lead advisor running the business, maybe you are on the board of directors, and maybe you hire somebody to run the day-to-day, and maybe you get to oversee the vision and make sure the culture of the company is good. Or there's a lot of other ways that you could hand off your business to your kid without trying to make them into yourself. Like you said earlier, and I loved it so much. It's like they don't have to rebel from you or become you. There is oftentimes a third option or fourth, fifth, sixth.
You had asked for an example, and out of the trust of my clients, everything will just be a little bit anonymous here. But I work with a property manager owner. We can call him Tom, who built the company. And probably about 50 units, from 50 units to about 2,000 units, probably 20, 25-year career. Future-focused strategist. Very, very much something I align with, but loves deal-making, big picture vision, has a daughter who works in the business after college, and he, of course, wants her to take over. But he comes to me frustrated. He says something like, I don't understand why she's not getting it. She's smart. She works hard. but she's not thinking like an owner. And I love when they say that, because I would say, what is an owner supposed to think like? Every owner is going to be different, right? So she spends all of her time with tenants or property managers instead of on acquisitions and growth. Classic business problem, because obviously both are necessary. But I then get, so what within, first time getting the opportunity, after he accepts the fact that he has to trust me and to find what Sarah is great at, I get a chance to talk with Sarah, as we shall call her. And I start to realize that she is people oriented. And one thing that really lit her up was how they do onboarding to reduce, to make sure that the staff wants to stay there. Reducing turnover is huge in our industry. Nobody wants to keep training new people. But because she's so people oriented, she is going to focus on the people. So as a result, all of her people-oriented systems create a piece within the company where the tenants actually feel heard, which is something that is much more important than some future-oriented builders are. They want to talk about acquisitions. So when her dad talks to her about buying a new complex, she's going to, her whole body language is going to change. Because to her, it's like, here we go.
It's a task. It's something she could probably be competently trained on how to do it and how to look for the right thing, but it's not something she's ever going to wake up and be like, I'm scrolling on my phone in the middle of the night to find things to acquire. She's going to be thinking through, are people happy? How do we make sure that that our tenants are happy renting from us, that they're getting everything covered, that we have a good organization here, that this is a great place to show up and go to work.
Well, so the problem is him being a builder and her being a caretaker. He started it knowing full well that he was trying to build an empire. Yeah. And my very first client, same thing. He always says, I'm building my empire. And now he has 3 young kids, and I think, where are they in the empire? But that's for another day. But she just wants to take care of people. Now, the understanding behind why that is and why her life had allowed her to be so people-oriented is that's for a deeper study that we do. Sure. But he kept getting frustrated because he's like, I just don't understand why she doesn't want this. Well, you know what? She's never going to want what you want. She wants what she wants. And if we do this correctly, is we first just have to accept the fact that this business is not going to tank just because she's different. And just because, so I have to, this is the therapist hat. I'm not a therapist. People say business therapist, but I have enough experience to be able to sit there and listen while Tom, our owner, is grieving, right? It sounds super cheesy, but I'm like, you have to accept the fact that if you do pass this on to her, the only way it's going to work is if we create it or a pathway for her to do what she wants with it. Yes. And that doesn't mean it's going to change drastically. It just means that in order for her to stay at the helm, we have to understand her leadership legacy that she's going to then create. And as soon as I say that to him, then he, as a dad, starts to realize, I do want, for my grandkids' sake, I want her to have a strong leadership story. So I said, okay, every leadership story is tailored to the person. You can't just pass the same leadership down. It doesn't work that way. Some people think that it doesn't. I have worked with a number of clients who I've done everything that my parents told me to do. I did it exactly the way they did it. Once we name that mismatch and we give that time to kind of ruminate, then we can make a plan. So either he can transition operations to her or culture, the parts that she's loving, or he has to bring somebody in to balance her out that will continue to be focused on acquisitions. Now, she has to be given the opportunity to then create and understand how the boundaries and the expectations work, because they're going to work different for him as they are for her. He needs everything to make sense for him. For her, it has to make sense to the people that are going to be working for her. So does that mean that she's not going to be a strong leader? She will be a strong leader when we give her permission to be who she is, doing how she does well, fully aware that there are blind spots there, and that we're going to hire accordingly to make sure those blind spots are filled. And those people are given permission to do that, knowing full well that she's going to be at the helm.
And she's going to feel a lot more comfortable. She's going to feel a lot more confident in those decisions because she's acting out of a place of like, hey, this is my zone I'm in. I am not trying to be my dad. I am being myself in my own strength, which makes any decisions that she does make a lot more comfortable and really adds to the success of the business overall.
So what ended up happening, which is interesting, is when that transition started to happen, some of the people already working in the company rose to the occasion. Why? Because they actually respond better to her leadership style than his. His was more of a very rigorous, hard, not fear inducing, but it can feel that way to the employees. And maybe the fear that if they don't, they won't be able to maintain their lifestyle or maintain their job position. Whereas with her, they all of a sudden felt like she cared so much about them that they wanted to perform better for her.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because then that elevates her leadership anyway, and then her drive changes. So when somebody comes in to help them continue to expand, that's fine. What ended up happening in this situation is they spun off components of the business that he was able to sell for his benefit. And then she became a consulting firm with the team members that really loved what she was doing to follow her. And now they go around working with other property management companies to help them understand how to value their people, which is exactly what she wants. The dad had the satisfaction of a culmination of a career that financially did what he wanted it to do, his empire that he wanted. And now she's off doing her thing. And it's because we did the work together that allowed both of them the opportunity to have somebody in the middle that said, hey, both of you are amazing. You both want something great for each other. But now it's time to really focus in on what's going to make sense for both of you going forward and for the company and for all the people that are employed by you. So you can't pass down your wiring. He built through strategy. She builds through people. Same industry, completely different operating systems. The legacy wasn't actually the business in this case. It was helping her. And awesome. As a parent, if you really have the ability to help your kid that way, that's a legacy that most every professional or parent wants to pass down to their kids. They just 100%. Need frameworks figured out how to do it.
And I've been really lucky to work for 2 companies that were privately owned, that were founder started, where the successor took it and completely made it into a different company in a lot of ways. The first was Chick-fil-A, which was my first job when I was 14. Started here in Hapeville, Georgia, in our backyard. And it was a pretty small operation, even though it started growing as a franchise under his leadership. But when as Dan, his son, took over, he really strategically built on and expanded it. Working at Chick-fil-A has a very strong culture in the corporate offices, but you've got, the founder's vision and then his son taking it and really turning it into what it is now. The same thing with Edward Jones, it was hey, let's democratize investing for small, for America, because Wall Street is controlling everything. So let's take stuff and go to the towns. And he did that, and he was able to get a little bit of a footprint. But when his son took over, he was able to really grow the firm into, when Ted Jones took over from Edward Jones, he was able to really turn it into the large firm that it is today. So it's really interesting and that's the cases where maybe the successor was more like the strategic visionary one. But another good example of, you can take the best parts of your parent, the founder, and bring the best parts of yourself and take that business and grow it into your thing. Right. It's
funny that you say that, because with culture being a touchy-feely word, I am a strategic thinker. So everything to me is strategy and logic. And so culture sometimes is too cheesy or ethereal, as I sometimes say, for my brain to work.
Sure.
But now, because of the way that I do things, I actually look at it like a puzzle piece. Like all of them are puzzle pieces. So in culture, I need to know what are the components that have to be true in order for our workers to really enjoy working, for our customers to really trust and enjoy working with us. And then if there is a growth pattern, what does that make sense for everybody involved? And it's funny because I guess a fair amount of target clients for me become these business owners who think they want a family environment. So they want their employees to be like family. And then you say, what comes with family is drama.
Yeah.
But when it comes, so culture to me is no longer just a touchy-feely word. In the case of a Chick-fil-A, that culture, I've watched even within different locations, the way that it is executed is determined by the person who's running the execution.
Big time. I've worked for several operators and interim operators, and I can tell you, it's like when mom walks in the house, the whole tone of the house changes for better or for worse, one way or the other, based on what mom's mood is. Right. Mm-hmm. Or not. And I'm not saying that to be like facetious or rude, but like if you're in that role, like especially as the mother in the house or as, a key parent, like you set the tone. And that's how the operator is inside of a Chick-fil-A. You set the tone for what everybody underneath you is doing and how they're running and what kind of stuff slips and falls through the cracks and how well we follow SOPs in the handbook. all of that.
But so that's kind of one of the things that I do in my work is I don't want people to follow somebody else's playbook. I want them to learn what their playbook looks like. And you can take pieces and parts from playbooks to make your own. It's not like we're starting from scratch every time, but what we are doing is uncovering what's actual for each person that I work with. And that's why it doesn't matter if it's a business owner or even just a professional, is especially for the generation that we're very much raised to do as you're told, follow this path, everything will be fine. And it was for a long time. I don't fault people for following that step. My dad was one of those guys. I mean, he spent 30 years and out. You retire with a pension. That company is still there. It wasn't his company. He was just a worker. He retired very young just because that's what you were supposed to do according to the path. But that pension's not there for that company anymore. It's there for, I mean, he got out in time. The market did lots of weird things right after. And you know, he's kind of doing his life. But
new employees coming on board are not getting the same
not
pension.
Getting that.
The structure's different, and you have to take a lot of individual ownership and say, what do I want retirement to look like, if that's a thing? Or I just prefer to think of it as financial independence, not retirement. But like, when can I become financially independent to the point that work is optional and I can focus on what's important to me and spending my time in meaningful ways that bring me pleasure and add value and allow me to contribute. That's more important than retirement. And a lot of people don't like the word. I don't love the word retirement, even though I exclusively work with retirees. I've worked with people who have been financially independent for years and they were still working. And I had a guy this summer and he was financially independent and he was working, and he called me, and, you know, at our last fall review of the year before, hey, this is going great. I'm going to do this for a couple of years longer. And then early in the spring, it was like, no, we're going now. But having the option to choose, that's the important thing. But now, to your point, you kind of have to learn how to march to your own beat to build that financial independence for yourself. Going back to business owners, as you're thinking through things like legacy, succession planning, and I'd say doing the touchy-feely work of succession planning, which is the planning, the thinking about how ought things to go, not what papers should be drawn up. When is a good time, or what are some cues or triggers or good times that business owners need to be having this inner dialogue and working through these processes?
We hit it right off the bat. Whenever somebody is curious because they feel like something's off and they're not sure, like if they start to ask themselves, like, how much longer do I want to do this? Or what's the next step? Or they feel like people get these gut instincts. And one of the things that I do is I do a 90-minute intense, like, fork in the road decision clarity session where we kind of have to hit it really hard on to say, what's the difference between your gut instinct and your fear center? And that's most of the time that indecisive feeling that something's off. And that's when we say, that's what I mean, use that. There are components that I use right off the bat for legacy, and the legacy, the way that I touch it at the beginning, has nothing to do with what's the full financial picture looks like.
Sure.
It's most people have, I mean, money is the thing that drives a lot of people. We know this. Money right now rules the world, unfortunately, but that's just kind of how that's how we're operating. And that's only one core driver. And I use a 5 core driver assessment very quickly to say, if everything was completely ideal, what is the order in which that makes sense for you? And then we go back and we say, okay, the reason why you might feel stuck is because we'll go back and rank and rate each one for what's currently happening. And then I have to help them get to realistic assessment based on their behavior, because their behaviors are what's going to tell me everything. Your behavior tells us what you value. Yes. And that's where we have to come to the determination is, are you, a lot of people, it's a self-preservation piece of, they don't want to lose what they built, or they don't want to lose what they have, or they're trying to prove that they made it, you know, whether they made it in terms of the eyes of their parents or the eyes of their spouse or the eyes of their kids. If there's a lot of self-preservation involved, they're going to be making a lot of decisions that may not feel right.
I see that a lot in retirement planning too, where a lot of times you'll have, especially for your traditional employees, but even more so for business owners, you've got something that you've been giving a lot of time and effort to, and you're choosing to stop that, but you don't know, you really haven't thought through, like, what am I retiring to? What am I going into after this? And what is my next piece of purpose that I'm going for? And if you really don't have a clear vision of that, you can oftentimes resort to what you're describing, which is this mentality of scarcity with our money, which is like, well, I have to make sure that I don't run out of money in retirement, or obsessing over retirement calculators, obsessing over the daily value of your portfolio. I call it watching your strawberries grow. It's a horrible waste of time. And I used to ask clients, like when I was onboarding them, like, if time and money were not an issue, what would you do with your retirement? And I found that that was really tough for them to imagine. It's like saying, if you won the lottery, then it's like, well, of course, they either would say, well, I'm simple, I'd go on a trip here and there, or they have an outlandish thought, like, I'll buy a jet. But instead now, a lot of times I'll say, hey, if for some reason, God forbid, you found out you were only going to have 10 years to be retired, right? That was it. And you're going to conclude, a doctor told you you'd conclude your retirement in 10 years. What are the things you would really want to accomplish? Or who are the people you'd really want to spend time with? And how would you do that with them? And people start to frame that in a mentality of like, okay, I'm thinking about a great decade. What are the bucket list items? You start checking those off. Okay, now what am I doing in between bucket list items? And then you start to realize, hey, there's an animal shelter I'd really like to volunteer at because I love pets. I already have enough pets. I don't need more pets, but I can go take care of the pets at the animal shelter. Or I want to be the one. My grandparents always took me RVing to Yellowstone in the summer. I want to take my grandkids out as long as I can. But when you frame it with some constraints, you start to fill that up with possibilities. Whereas if you're a business owner, you're just thinking, oh, I'm going to sell the business and I'll have $10 million so I can do everything I want. Great. You still have no clue what you're doing. You're going to start just watching TV all day long or partying uncontrollably.
Do you know what's interesting is, as you were going through all of it from the very beginning of that last set that you were talking, all I could think about is all of the stress that led to that, the fear and the constraint that the business owner or the parent in that situation is feeling is already having an impact on the kids. And they don't even realize it. Now, I see it because I study it for a living. So I get a chance to see and say, hey, is this really what you want your kids to learn? Which is part of the reason why when Dan and I started this business, the whole point was we have to be transparent. We have to share everything, because that's the only way to pass down wisdom, I guess, is every mistake that we make. It's not like we're going to air out dirty laundry, but we're not afraid to share what we tried and maybe or what's causing us stress. And I wrote a Substack article, I don't remember how long ago, where one day I was sitting out on the back porch actually trying to create, and I'm not a big creative person. And I was just trying really hard. And my 10-year-old at the time kind of became my advisor. Why? Because I shared with him. I said, I'm trying really hard to do this or blah, blah, blah. Shared my frustration. And he said, Dad, it's not that deep. You need to go and find these people. And you just need to ask them what they need help with. It was so simple, and the beauty of it. And I realized at that moment, I was being vulnerable. I was not trying to protect him from my fear.
Yeah.
I also wasn't projecting it on him. I just shared with him what I was going through. You were overloading him
with like things that he couldn't handle. Like, here's a suitcase. You're 10 years old. It's heavier than you are. I need you to carry this burden and start thinking about the family budget. Like, it wasn't that.
And so as a result, then what I realize is that, okay, that's part of my job as a parent, is to help my kids understand that I'm not afraid of my own stress triggers. And if I'm not, then maybe they're going to be more open to having a conversation about stress triggers way before the time they get to me as a client. Because that's one of the problems is these people come to me and they're, mid to late 40s up to late 60s, and they're starting to ask themselves questions that they didn't realize they were having such an impact without intent.
Yes.
And I say, okay, when you say legacy, yes, financial, purpose is another one, but most people don't really have a purpose that they can understand, or they're not acting on it on a regular basis. But again, those are the two main ones people know about, but there are other core drivers. And I want my kids I want all my clients, but all of their kids to also be very well aware of all of those drivers, so that when any of them hit a stress point, they can actually have a conversation with their parent and say, hey, this is what's causing me stress, or this is what's got me stuck. Instead of just hoping, because hope is never a strategy, that enough resources will solve it for them, because it won't. There's never going to be enough resources to solve everybody's problems.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. Like, I've told my kids this about money too. my boys, they like to play Fortnite when they can, and they are always wanting V-Bucks. And I'm like, bro, there is not enough V-Bucks in the world. You don't understand how these game makers on the other side of this game are behavioral scientists that know how to make you want things. There will never be enough money for the things you want. You have to learn. It's an important skill to learn how to rein in your desire to get, because that is never going to actually solve a need for you. It's just something that it's okay to enjoy things appropriately, but you can't, there's nothing on the other side. There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's just more rainbow, and you're just going to keep searching for it. This has been a really good talk. I have enjoyed this immensely. How can my listeners learn more about you and Dan and what you guys are doing and writing?
That's a great question. I am in the Substack world now, which is relatively new to me. I have finally found a way to share stories from, it's funny you mentioned, I have one, I think, that I'm writing to come out tomorrow about one of my clients who came to me with no rudder on his ship. And now he says that my biggest thing is to provide him that rudder. I am frontporchjoe.substack.com.
Okay.
And that is where you'll see my writing. I am starting to do a little bit more on LinkedIn. And then maybe joining you in the podcast world. I have a couple of intensive clients and next leadership clients that have offered to come and share some of their experiences. Like I said, it's a very trust-based business, but to have them come back to the porch and share what they're doing is great. I do have a new workshop funny enough, one of my clients is actually starting it for me, where we tiptoe people into the waters at a wine bar. So we're going to be doing the first one here in Ackworth probably in the next few weeks. And then frontporchadvisors.com, I guess, is our website. And I will continue to share what I can when I can.
That's awesome.
Because I love what I do, and it's really hard to share it. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on and share a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Well, this has been
thank
a really
you to
good
Tom and
yeah.
Sarah for
definitely.
being guinea pigs.
This has been a hugely informative talk. I've really enjoyed it. We'll have to have you guys back on the show sometime. But in the meantime, thank you again for joining us, and I really look forward to our next talk.
Yep, sounds great. Thank you, Hamilton.
Yep.
This show reflects the personal opinions and viewpoints of myself, Hamilton Brandenburg, and my guests. Opinions and viewpoints are subject to change at any time without notice. No representation is made as to the accuracy, completeness, or relevance of the information presented. The information discussed is general in nature and does not constitute investment, tax, or legal advice, so consult with your tax, legal, and financial professionals about your specific situation. Past performance does not indicate future returns, and any indices mentioned are for reference and cannot be invested in directly. Brandenburg Financial Services is a DBA of CS Planning, an SEC-registered investment advisor.